Professor Donald Foster began teaching in 1953 at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. A faculty member of the Animal Sciences Department, Professor Foster taught undergraduate classes to students majoring in poultry science, and recently had started graduate seminars in feeding habits. His recent death in a car accident this past winter led to a bizarre discovery. Graduate student Meredith Franklin was involved in a work-study program with Professor Foster, and after his passing was asked to organize and clear out the contents of his office. It was in the back of one of these file cabinets that Ms. Franklin found a large padded envelope containing a journal and several odd photos by a Dr. Juniper Kingston. Ms. Franklin took the envelope back to her rented room and shared its contents with her then-boyfriend, Joe Garvin. Mr. Garvin was an aspiring writer and thought Ms. Franklin's discovery would make for an interesting short story. Ms. Franklin was uncomfortable with the idea and feared repercussions should the school find out. She reluctantly agreed, though, after her boyfriend promised to never reveal the source of his story. It is uncertain how the facts came to light. In several police interviews with friends of Ms. Franklin, it became clear a messy breakup between the two most likely led to the leak in information. Mr. Garvin remained firm in his declaration of innocence, and a jury agreed with him several months later. No one could have foreseen the tragic ending this journal brought Meredith and Joe. It is uncertain as to why Professor Foster had the envelope tucked away in his office. None of his colleagues had ever heard mention of his interest in Dr. Kingston's work. Dr. Juniper Kingston was born in Kyles Ford, Tennessee in 1875. He went to veterinarian school at Iowa State University's College of Veterinary Medicine, where upon graduating returned to his hometown to open a practice and care for his parents. The clinic was temporarily closed during the Spanish-American War. Dr. Kingston was stationed in Puerto Rico, where the Army put his veterinarian skills to good use. After the war, the doctor returned home, but his demeanor had changed. Outside his clinic, where he once cheerfully greeted fellow residents, sat a sullen figure, lost in thought. He moved himself and his parents to an old farmhouse far on the outskirts of town. It was in the overgrown orchard out back that Dr. Kingston's art found a stage. It was his amateur interest in taxidermy that led to the doctor's unique sculptures. He was fascinated by the intricate replacement process used to, as he would say, freeze life. The good doctor was in continual search of literature pertaining to taxidermy and studied much of the work and writings of Henry Ward, but it was the work of Carl Akeley that turned his attention to other species. Mr. Akeley was a renowned figure in the world of taxidermy and elevated the habitat diorama to the status of art in history museums everywhere. He built the first ever diorama for science education in 1889. Mr. Akeley headed many expeditions to Africa, joined by fellow scientists, artists, and safari hunters. He traveled far into the Belgian Congo, setting up camp high in the Mikeno Mountains. It was here Mr. Akeley hunted, skinned, and skeletonized his gorillas to be brought back to the States. In the book On the Gorilla Trail, the author Mary Hastings Bradley writes of her travels with Mr. Akeley in Africa. This book in particular was a favorite of Dr. Kingston. It was one of the few things the otherwise quiet doctor was willing to talk about. In 1932, Dr. Kingston made his first excursion to Africa, and, with the help of his nephew, caught several howler monkeys. The doctor made many expeditions to the Congo Basin in the coming years. He became a familiar sight in the villages along the River Jah. One local in particular, Kanja, became a close friend of the doctor's. He was the last to see Dr. Kingston the morning of his disappearance. Dr. Juniper Kingston was not heard from again. Kanja relayed what information he had to the doctor's nephew, but the mystery remained unsolved. Eventually, news of the doctor's disappearance reached Kyles Ford. After a year, the residents held a ceremonial funeral for the good doctor. With no will or guidance from his nephew, the town simply decided to sell off the doctor's possessions. None of the townspeople knew of the orchard in the back of his house. It was the town realtor that discovered the beautifully preserved figures up in the trees and on the ground. Her photos are all that remain of the doctor's years of work. Shortly after the house was sold, the new owners burned the small orchard and cleared the land.